First, I want to thank everyone and the Johnsons for letting me move this to October. I just felt if I'm going to give a presentation on gravestones, it needs to happen near Halloween. It just felt like it was appropriate, and needed to happen. It was adamant in my mind. So thank you for letting me do this. I'm excited about it. I had a lot of fun looking through gravestones, prepare for this. I got to go through all my ancestors' ones, which was actually pretty eye-opening, after doing some of the research, as well as just looking at ones in the local community. I've been very involved in building graves in the mid-cities area. So I had a lot of my own photos and experience with the local community's headstones, as well as some of those out in New England, since those are some of the oldest graves, not only that we have in America, but in many ways throughout the world. Because in Europe and other countries, you'll have a lot more repurposing of graves. Well, we have this nice land where we just keep adding them to it, right? So we'll get through and talk through a few different things today, but a lot of it will be on the symbols of graves, what are on tombstones, and what to make of some of those symbols. But before I go into that, I always like asking myself this question whenever I encounter any record set. And that is like, why should I bother trying to understand this? Why is it worth my time? Well, I'm approaching this not just from the symbols perspective, but from graves in general. Like, why should you bother? And that's because you can find out some cool information. You're not going to find the same information in every gravestone. Some gravestones will have just 2 initials, and that's it. Maybe they can't be read at all, and you don't even know if it's your ancestor's gravestone. Other times, it has a date and a name. But other times you find really interesting information, which can either confirm other records, have things that other records don't have, or just helps you discover things you didn't know. So there's a lot of different examples of this. I list them down here in the slide that you can see, but you're going to get names of people. Sometimes it's nicely the maiden name. So you can see in like this Italian grave that's over on the right-hand side for Celia, that it lists her maiden name, right? The Giusmarotti. Right, so that's there. And then in other cases, you'll get a nickname, which can be fun too. Most commonly, of course, you'll get dates, birth and death dates, you'll get marriage dates, sometimes the places of the marriage. You'll hear relationships described. I've been to grave sites where you'll see lots of stones around it of kids' names, relate to the family that may not have been on your pedigree chart. And so it really helps you fill it out a little bit more than just on your direct descendant, as the case may be. You'll see religious beliefs, military service, occupations. If you look at this Italian one in the front that says Secondo Bertoldi, right? You'll see right below his name, it says, chimico farmacista, right? That's a chemist, pharmacist. Now, chemist is a common term for a pharmacist overseas. We don't really call them chemists here in the United States, but when I lived in England, very common term. So you can learn right from this grave, what his role was. You can also see the third line from the bottom. See, it says Patriota Bervido, so a brave patriot. Who's one who's really out there. So he was involved in his country. That's pretty neat to be able to learn that from the gravestone itself. Sometimes you'll see in symbols as we go through this, you'll see the ancestor or deceased participation in particular societies. Perhaps that is a fraternal society. Maybe it's a historical marker that marks them as participating in the American Revolution, or the Mormon Battalion, as the case may be. What's neat is sometimes you'll see the cause of death. So if you look at this bottom one, it says sacred to the memory of Major Jonathan Allen, who was slain as he was hunting on the 7th of and then it keeps going. But it's interesting that you can actually see the cause directly of his death in here, slain while hunting. So I don't see that too frequently on graves, but as I was looking through some of the New England ones, I definitely came across that, of which this was one of those. So you're going to get a combination of things like this. Maybe there's other things you could find too, but it makes the physical grave, worth consulting. So the natural question is, what are some limitations of that record? Well, graves wear down. That is the sad truth. That they will get worn down, less with recent graves, but definitely more so with old graves. Recent graves, many of them are made out of granite, which is going to last a very, very, very long time. But many of these older graves, of course, were not, and so have eroded. I mentioned, the United States has older graves. You go over to Europe, a lot of them have been repurposed. You go to an Italian community, some Spain, and so on. Like the grave might be used for only 10 years. And then that body is exhumed, it's dug up, and then the bone's stuck inside of an ossuary. And then the grave in the town is repurposed for someone else who's died more recently. So that they only got so much space that they can't just keep adding, because there's many more dead people than there are alive people. And so it's a way of trying to connect those who are living with their most recently deceased. Now, of course, you go inside a church, you're going to see like some older graves, right? Usually priests or nobles and so on, or the rich, but you're not really going to see it as much for the common man, right? I don't know if anyone's been to Europe and tried to find an ancestor's grave, but more difficult than in the US. The other thing to call out is that who writes the grave, right? The grave is written by the survivor, right? The dead person isn't there to write it. They might have dictated some of it before, but you still have to realize, what's the quality of the information that goes on it? Maybe it is based on that survivor's memory or what the survivors wanted. So if you take this picture to the right, that is of my ancestor. This is my great-great-grandfather, Frederick Colhett. My third child is named after this man. You'll notice his wife is listed right after that, and his wife. Well, she's not buried there. She most definitely is not. She's buried in Utah, not in American Falls, Idaho. But this gravestone would give you the impression that she was buried there. This is because she got remarried, and that person she remarried didn't want her buried out here. So what the family wanted, her children, what they wrote on the gravestone is different than what reality is. So you just have to be aware of this.
Marty, we had a question. Maybe that's what Shirley's going to say. We had the question pop up. Somebody posted a question, wants you to define ossuary. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, I've heard different terms along its line, but think of it as a place where bones are kept.
Well, is it like a small crypt, a box, a jar, or?
No, I mean, I've seen different kinds. Some are underground, some are like whole buildings. There's one in Prague. It's really neat. It's like they've decoratively put all the bones everywhere. So you can see them very artistically done. But yeah, they're sometimes they're stuffed in walls or on shelves. But it's a more permanent resting place for the bones, where they can deteriorate, and versus them being in a formal grave.
Yes, that's what happened to Jim Morrison.
If we get some time towards the end, I'll pull up this place from Prague. It's pretty gnarly. Any other questions on that? I know we like to think of graves as being more permanent places for folks, but not as much the case. They do try to, in most places, wait a couple generations before they do it, but I'm sure it depends on the size of the community. All right, let's keep moving. So you want to find a grave, you recognize the limitations of it, and you want to find it. So how do you go about that? Well, there's a few different ways. I know Jim and I have given a training on the past on Find a Grave and Billion Graves. So these are kind of virtual cemeteries, which you can type in a name, and often, if they're buried in the US, locate them. Not always, but you can in some cases, and even see pictures in some cases too. So that can be a good way of finding out cemetery that they're buried in the US. Then there are other places in case they aren't found there, right? Or you want a corroborating record. So a couple of these I have shown in pictures of my ancestors. So on the far right, that's my great-grandmother, Constance Eugene Wallace. If you look at the bottom there, where it had that nice red circle, you can see, hey, she was buried over in the city cemetery. This is in the city of Salt Lake, so it's Salt Lake City Cemetery. I've been to the grave. You can, also see the name of the mortuary, the White Chapel Incorporated, with the funeral director there. So if I was, for whatever reason, unable to find certain things in the city cemetery, I might be able to look up information on that funeral home and look at their records to try to find out where they're buried. Obituaries can be good too. My great-great-grandfather, who was Samuel Barry Wallace, Constance's father, you can see his obituary is here in the center at the top, and that red circle at the bottom calls out, hey, on Tuesday prior to the funeral services, the burial will take place in the city cemetery, which is also in Salt Lake here. So obituaries can key that into you. When you don't have that, sometimes you'll have just like church burial records where you can make inferences like, hey, what are the nearby cemeteries that are by this parish's church, the Christ Church in Denton, Lancashire in England. And John Eastwood, who's my great-great-great-grandfather, he also lived by 23 Seymour Street. So I could look at where the street was that he was living just before he died. I can see the church where, his burial was involved and infer, hey, which cemetery should I be looking at to, try to see where he might have been buried if he's still there. So those are some of the common ones to check. Has anyone else used any other record sets to find an ancestor's grave? I'm eager to hear. All right, that is the way. I get it. So
Old Bible records, Marty.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. We could write in there, or maybe even your just personal ancestral file, something that someone's kept. Where they're saying, hey, these were people died. All right, so that's where you find them. So you might be asking yourself, well, if they're all on billion graves or find a grave, why do I care? Why do I want to go and physically go to a grave versus just look at the picture online? What might be some of the reasons you might want to go there in person?
Incomplete record of that cemetery, and there's I have a family story from this. So I just learned this a couple days ago when we were at a family wedding out of town. My sister and my dad had gone to some trouble to try to locate some of our Jewish ancestors. So from my dad's side of the family, and there's extensive roots in the Chicago area, and they're pretty well documented, but we just couldn't find this one family beyond a given generation. And my sister did a lot of searching along with my dad, called a cemetery, used all their resources. There was just no record, but we knew we had family in that cemetery. And when they were about to give up, my sister happened to look over at this obelisk right next to her that she'd overlooked before. And there it is, marking the presence of that family. And that wasn't overseas. That wasn't some German town that had been bombed into rubble. That was Chicago, in a very well-known Jewish cemetery that had been record kept to death. They just weren't there. And we wouldn't have known had we not had a family member there looking for it.
Love it. So these data sets that you have online, right? They're done by volunteers and users, and they write them, they put them in. They can miss something. They can miss, Jeff's, family's ancestor if they're not looking for it.
Marty,
Any other reason?
I'm sorry, the older ones that you see oftentimes are private cemeteries and belong to the family or who's living at the location that the family was living in at the time that they died, and then now there's somebody else that's living there. We found one of our family's cemeteries, and it was somebody that wasn't even a member of the family that was living there, but was taking care of that old cemetery. And so we were able to get pictures of the headstones. So I encourage you that if you know where they were living, if you have any kind of indication where they might have been living, that you check there as well if they were pretty old graves. So.
Thank you. Any other reasons why we might want to be there in person?
Well, like you said, sometimes there are small markers around that, maybe a baby or a child or something that might not be recorded somehow.
Got it. All right, these are the ones I wrote down. So accuracy is one of them, right? So it's not always that they didn't include the record, just when they included it, they didn't do it well. I mean, this could be the photo wasn't very good. What they wrote down could have been wrong. Like, so when you search for it, you're not going to find it, right? So you're relying on people here. There's limited records. These kind of really hit mostly US and a few European countries. I haven't seen them really go out and mass other continents and countries. So there's limited records. The details can somewhat be lacking. Someone's probably taking a faraway shot of the whole grave, right? Not really going into a specific detail. I show an example of that in the bottom right here, right? When you see something that significant and magnificent on a grave, you're going to want to get much closer to it and take that very close-up shot of it. which you're not going to get from, a more just kind of broad shot. Also, tombstones, they're three-dimensional, right? When someone just takes a shot here, they could be completely not taking a shot of the back like you have in the top right here, which could mean something quite significant to you. You have to remember not that there could be multiple pieces to that monument that all have their own three-dimensional character to consider. So one photo may not handle it. Next, there's paying respect, right? I mean, when I go on Billion Graves or so on, while I think it's cool, I found my ancestor, I don't really feel like I'm visiting them. Yeah, you could put these virtual flowers and so on there. I guess that's cool, but it does not have the same effect for me. I don't feel like I'm paying my respects when I'm doing that. Would you go visit the grave? There's likely other places you can visit, right? The home where that person lived, or other places they worked, or the church that they were around. So there's these other places you can connect with. Shirley mentioned really well the understanding of relationships with the other graves. It can be kind of hard to grasp that when you're just looking at pictures, right? That all these people tie together in this particular way. And you can also struggle to sense the historical environment of which they're a part of. I'm going to give a few examples of that. So I don't know if anyone can identify off the top of their head what this is a picture of, but this is Normandy, right? I went to Normandy as a 15-year-old. And this picture doesn't even come close to doing it justice. I mean, you can't fit in a lens unless you're like, I guess, really high up in an airplane, all the different graves that are there. And it was really eye-opening to see all of the different graves when I was over there in France. So like, you can't create that feeling, I think, well through a photo. And like, if you just saw one picture, just your ancestors crossed, they had children, right, and not just perished as a youth, you're not going to get the sense of the huge conflict that they were involved in and all of the terrible death that happened that day, versus when you're there and you're amongst all of that, you feel very differently. I'll give another example. This has a bunch of crosses. This is also from mass death, but this is from the 1918 pandemic. If you just see one of your ancestors' graves, you're not going to see that they were part of a much more tragic event. You'll notice all these different graves. The death date is 1918. This was the Spanish flu. This is what hit these people. So if you just saw William, Hovart's grave, you wouldn't think about Teresa and these others of his community. They're all struggling with maybe there's a newborn death or a young child's death or something like that, how it affected that community. Being in the cemetery will communicate that to you much more strongly. So, all right, I've talked about, the value of graves in general. We're going to get into symbols here, but I felt I should start with a disclaimer. While there's a lot of symbols that culturally make sense in the sense of their meaning seems to correlate with religious views and other views we've had for centuries, some are definitely left up to some interpretation. Some may mean multiple things, not just clearly one thing. So deciding that it means a particular thing for your ancestor is an interpretive, even speculative work. And when you get to some symbols, there's a lot of scholarly debate amongst what they mean. So I wouldn't want you to take what I say tonight as like gospel truth, that this is, if it's on this grave, this is what it means. Some symbols are much more complex, to understand than others, and so I just give some examples here. What is the dragon on the left tombstone meant to signify? This one in the center, it's this 7-pronged entity, this abstract design. Many of them look like they have heart buds at the end, but not all of them. What does it mean? There's a bunch of buildings kind of constructed on this one on the right side. Was he an architect? Is this of a famous building? Is it Masonic? What does it mean? So I don't want you to think that everything is, crystal clear, and I can just give you like a glossary and you'll just be like, yep, when I'm in a grave cemetery, I'm going to understand everything that is meant. That said, there is a common lexicon. You might say there is a lot of similarities and things that you will see in cemeteries that I don't want you to think it's all up for debate. But there is ambiguity, and to claim otherwise is dishonest. So I wanted to call that out. I think it's also useful to compare and contrast a little bit with the graves we have today with the graves in the past. So these are a lot of graves in the present. These are of my ancestors. The one on the left is the Colheps. The one on the right, these are the Wallaces and Minerva Tykert, who's my great grandmother. You can see she's buried down there in the bottom right. You'll see one of the fun things about modern graves is like they seem to like to put in there a stamp of their life passion or their interest. So Minerva didn't get to put in her paintbrush, but her husband was a rancher, so we get to see him with a horse there, and he chased and broke many wild horses throughout his lifetime to earn a living. George Wallace was a cowboy, and you can see the Rodriguez and the Stepp. These are from local Bedford cemeteries. You can see, hey, they really loved music. You're not going to see an electric guitar 100 years back, or violins or things like this typically carved into stone. This is a modern phenomenon. Elephants, you're not going to see it. Just telling you. So it's useful and it's cool to see how gravestone art is transforming. The material I already mentioned is a lot more like granite and going to last longer, but it also in some ways is more kitsch than it was in the past. So that's what we have today. And if you take an older grave and see how it is today, they got some problems, right? They're falling apart. My Giddens ancestors, many of them are split in half now. Jacob Wade, who was my great grandmother's brother, his is cracked to pieces here on the ground. And then Eliza Giddens, you can see hers is just very hard to read in general. So graves deteriorate. This is a sad fact of them. You'll see in some of them, they've replaced them with kind of a secondary, grave marker to try to, make up for the fact that it can't be read well. The one on the left, you can somewhat read it still. E.P. Oakley, right, when she was born, it died. That's from my ancestors. And then this is over at the Wiley Cemetery. But you can see this one is not easy to read at all. You really need that additional marker to make any of it out. So if there were symbols on these before, they're not really easy to find anymore. So just be aware of the condition in which you'll encounter graves. All right, on to symbols. I'm really going to get there, I promise. Let's start going through them. I'm going to go through them categorically, and I'm sure you guys have seen some of these on there. So these are all from my ancestors. So you'll see the hands together, right? This is a symbol of religious devotion, of prayer. We'll see crosses on graves, often symbols of Christianity. You'll see different kinds of crosses, right? The Latin cross, the Sun cross, the Irish cross. You have these three-pronged crosses, on my Catholic ancestors here. Sometimes you'll see them with flowers, like the one of Joe Pulido. He's my great-grandfather. Often the flowers with the cross, it's a symbol not just of Christ there, but the resurrection, right? Life through Christ. Then you'll see other symbols. Can anyone read what it says in the center of the cross and the one in the top left, the Moriels? What's in the middle of that cross? What's it say? I know it's shadowed. This is the downside of billion graves. This one, again, is the quality of the photo you get. Can anyone read it? Okay, it says IHS. Does anyone know what that means? Okay.
Thing,
it means Jesus. So it's the first three letters of his name in Greek. So you'll see this in there. The IHS is there. It's usually in the center of the cross. Jesus is at the center of the atonement in our life, right? So that they'll often put him there. You'll also see wrapped around it something. What is that? That's next to the letters and hanging down from the cross.
Can't see it.
Yeah, it's okay. Maybe you can't see it well. It's a rosary. All right. And you see that rosary as well on the one on the right. Does anyone here know much about rosary beads?
Yeah.
Don knows a little bit. Do you want to talk about how the structure of a rosary? Do you know much about that?
Well, when you're in a Catholic church and you start with the rosary, you go through the stations. There's stations on the walls.
For the cross.
And as you go through, you're going through the beads to go through all the stations. And I forget what they're called. That was a long time ago. But you use the rosary for that. And I guess some of the people use rosary like as a charm almost, right? Like carrying a good luck thing, or just to have, like people wear a cross or whatever.
Yep.
You have your rosary with you, kind of thing. But I'm sorry, I don't remember all this stuff, but
No, it's okay.
you did follow the beads and the rosary as you went through these stations that are on the walls inside the Catholic Church.
Yep, and they would use them as you say, like a charm, but in a way, a focus, right? A way of drawing
Right.
themselves to God. So you'll see the beads have different sections. If you follow my Autovola ancestors here on the right side, there's 5 different, they call them decades, right? But it's a set of 10 beads. Each is for a Hail Mary prayer. Then you get to the larger bead, that's for the Lord's Prayer, right? And then you have a Gloria prayer, that's the, for the kind of central strand that goes down from the heart. So those have, significance. And so if you just see the rosary, you might forget, as a non-Catholic, the significance of what's involved there. So I wanted to call that out. You'll also see in the bottom left-hand side, this is my, my great-great-grandfather, Francisco Pulido Ortega. You can see there's some grapes that are next to the cross. What do grapes often symbolize in religious contexts? So if like you get the sacrament or the Eucharist in another faith, you're drinking something, right? It's grape juice or wine. What does it symbolize in that instance?
Blood of Christ.
That's right. So again, it's the sacrifice of Christ next to the cross. There's a double kind of meaning there, right? Okay, there's other religious, markers here too. These are from my Gideon's ancestors. You can see there's definitely some cross symbols in that bottom band that's there, right? But then there's other ones. Look at the top. This is a family. They all have the same gravestone style, but there's like an altar at the top, right, with some tassels, and then there's a book there. This is where you could run into some ambiguity. Is the book a book of scripture, or is it the book of life? Right? What does that book mean? Maybe it means both, right? But there's some of that, significance of the book on the altar. You'll have sometimes these epitaphs on them of religious nature, many warn of death. Like, tell them that bottom left-hand one. Remember, friend, as you pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you will be. Prepare for death and follow me. Right? So you're mortal. You're going to die. This is going to happen to you. Be ready. Does anyone notice anything different between these tombstones that has a different symbol?
And down below.
It's okay. It's like, where's Waldo? I'll give you a hint. It's in the center one. I feel like I should play a Final Jeopardy music.
Looks like there's a scroll halfway down with the letters FLT in it.
That is correct. So it's not a scroll, it's a chain with 3 links. FLT. Friendship, love, and truth. This is the symbol of the International Order of Oddfellows. So yeah, my ancestor was an Oddfellow. I didn't know that until I had to do this presentation for you guys and was going through, my records, of these gravestones. And I saw, wait a minute, I know that symbol. I had no idea my ancestor was that. So there you go. We'll talk about fraternal orders more later. I'm focusing on the religious ones here for now. But hey, that's a cool little difference there that I discovered. All right, some other religious ones. You can see the IHS again here. Do you see any other symbols though that we haven't discussed yet between any of these pictures?
Alpha to Omega.
Alpha Omega.
That's right. That's the one on the right and on the one on the left here in the right side of the cross.
And the fish.
That is correct. You also got a sun cross in the bottom left of that cross too. So Alpha and Omega, often associated with Jesus Christ, also the end and beginning of your life. So there can be a double meaning there.
Now, Marty,
Yep.
Marty, on I'm here pointing and you can't see me point.
You good?
The ornate cross, is that an Irish or Celtic cross? And what's the significance behind that?
That is an Irish tall tombstone. I've got, Marty, that's my thing. I like the high crosses.
I'm gonna let you go at it. You go talk.
No, I mean, I get tickled when church people come to visit me. I've got this big book on Irish high crosses, a big table book, and they're gorgeous. I mean, I spent all of my time in Europe and Ireland and Scotland, just going to cemeteries to take pictures of Irish high crosses. They're gorgeous. The thing is that generally they tell a story, and especially at Edinburgh Castle, there's a huge high cross, and it's carved in such a fashion that it tells a biblical story, because people back then couldn't read, but they could see the pictures, and they would follow around the three-dimensional cross for a particular biblical story.
Isn't that a Celtic cross? And the symbol,
Yes.
the significance is in the scrolling is there's no beginning and no end.
Yeah, I know what you mean. The knots that the Celtics use all.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like what both of you said. Reminded me a little bit of what Don was saying with the Stations of the Cross, right? In the cathedral. You may not be able to read, but you can follow the story of Jesus Christ as you go around the cathedral. Here you're going around a tombstone to learn a particular story. I don't have anything to add to what was said there. So thank you. All right, there's some other religious symbols that you'll see. The gates of heaven, right? Someone passes, they're going to the pearly gates. You'll see this, somewhat commonly. I heard about an obelisk earlier. Obviously, it's more of an Egyptian marker that's been repurposed in modern times, or even, after the Egyptians. You can see that in the middle. And then there's another altarpiece one here too, with also gates. All these have gates. You see a bird, the one of peace, so symbolizing the Holy Spirit and peace and rest, right? Two. Sometimes you'll see scripture verses, right? That are in there. John Wallace Walls, also a star there too, and then another Jesus symbol on the right. So this is similar to the IHS, right? The Cairo mark of being Jesus' name. Sometimes you'll see Latin, Requiem Aeternum, Dona et Domine. So eternity of rest in the realm of God. All right. Religious markers too. You'll see hands, kind of pointed up. This one's, I've seen a few different descriptions for this one, so I admit some ambiguity here. But usually it's like, don't look down. The person's not there. They've gone up. They're no longer here. They're with God. Other times it's look to God, for peace and comfort. Look to Him for your needs. But I liked the first explanation best.
I am so glad you did that one, because I have seen that a lot. And when we worked in Pasadena, Texas, there was a large Baptist church that had a very tall steeple, and on the top, it had a gold-plated hand that must have been 10 feet tall. I mean, you could see it over most of the town. And I tried to find out the symbolism, and they just said, going to church, you're pointed towards heaven. But it's rather odd on top of a steeple.
I take it was the second finger and not the third.
It was the pointing at the index finger. Oh,
Your mess.
we need to mute you.
Couldn't resist. Yeah, I'm terrible. All right. So there's the markers there. I thought this was really cool. You'll see it today in terms of you'll have one stone where it's, more rectangle and multiple names are on it, but less where it looks like they took two distinct stones and tried to, create that sensation of distinction while also, putting them together, right? So you can see this is sometimes done with marriage, which you would expect, but not always. And that's why I want you to be cautious there. So see on the left-hand side, Samuel Andrew and his wife, Abigail Andrew, they're both there, Andrews. With a nice, quote that spans both tombstones, while in the middle section up, it is distinct and separate, right? So separate, together, it's a neat aesthetic effect. But the one on the right, they aren't married, right? So this is in memory of Mrs. Abigail Andrews, wife of Mr. Dennison Andrews, right? But then on the right side, just after it, it's Miss Rebecca, daughter of Mr. Dennison, Mrs. Abigail Andrews. So this is a daughter and a mother, from which there's that trunk grave. So don't assume if it's joint that they're necessarily married. They could have another, close family relationship. All right, you'll see communications of marriage, different types. The rings are often a symbol of marriage in modern times, not always. Some great advertiser got us to think that, if we put diamonds on rings, that it shows our love, and we've gone ahead with it. But not always was that so. You see a heart, down here with a marriage date from my Tykert ancestors. And then the Latter-day Saint ones, there's a pretty neat trend that you'll see here of putting the temple, and not just any temple, but the very specific temple in which they were likely sealed, right? I mean, maybe they just put some of their fairly certain 99% that they would have been sealed in said temple when it shows the engraving of that. So what's neat is you can see different kinds of temples, different physical ones, to point you out to where that happens. So does anyone know the temple shown in the top right?
Provo or Ogden.
Yep, correct. I don't need to ask on the bottom right. We all know that's Salt Lake. You'll see these two. These are the same temple. Which one's this one? Slightly trickier.
Manti?
I think that is on the left one. I think the one on the right, though, with the brick, I think that's Logan. For sure. So
I know it's not Dallas.
What was that?
I said, I know it's not Dallas.
Yes, not one other neat trend I've seen in some LDS temples is they, view themselves as an eternal family, right? So even if the deceased aren't there, they list all of their different children, together. So my mom is listed in the middle of this bottom right-hand one from my grandfather, who is now passed away, and so his death date would be in there. But when they took this picture, it wasn't. You can see, all of the sisters, the siblings are listed there. And so what a great way of being able to so quickly see, oh yeah, this is the family, on this tombstone. So neat modern trends that LDS people are following. Some other things you'll see on LDS grave sites. This is of, one of my ancestors that crossed the plains, Minerva Wade Hickman. She was the wife of Wild Bill Hickman, his third wife. You can see that, when they cross the plains, they'll often put like a marker on the stone itself. This one's shared amongst multiple people, but you can see that pioneer marker that is next to her name. Her father, who, he crossed the plains, so to speak, but not the way many others did. He was a volunteer in the Mormon battalion, him and his son Jacob. So they, on their graves, you'll often see these little markers that say they served in the Mexican War and the volunteers for the U.S. Mormon battalion. There's, sometimes there's different styles of markers. You can see that little oxen head one below, and then the Moroni trumpet one above. And sometimes they put these commemorative plaques there too, to say, hey, look at all these different things about them. So the two women he married, one passed away. He married another when he was older and was a broom maker. What a great job in Salt Lake. Broom making. Now Jeff's here. So, I feel going into Jewish stuff, I almost feel like I should just rely on him, to speak on these things. But I will mention the ones that I'm aware of. You can correct me, as I go through it here. So one of the things you can notice is, of course, the Star of David, right? The star of the peace, the authority your king can bring. Right below it, we see the Ten Commandments, right? You'll often see these two letters that are on each grave. So in the middle one, inside the triangle, you'll see 2 letters, which stands each letter for, a Jewish statement for "here lies," and then that will be where the person, lies, of course. From what I understand, Jeff, the one on the right is when a person is of Levitical heritage, so being cleansed, to go on and perform the tasks associated with Levitical priesthood. Jeff, anything I said that's incorrect?
I think you'd be the better judge than I.
All right.
I just saw video of my dad at 3 years old celebrating Christmas. So,
Okay.
All right, I'd like to add on that middle one,
Yep.
those 2 columns stand for the temple,
Hmm.
the Jerusalem temple.
Love it. Thank you.
Mhm.
So these other ones, there's other symbols. So you can see obviously the Star of David again with the "here lies," notes there. You have the Cohen hands, right? I'm not doing it fully right. I'm gonna get those fingers together. So they lift up their hands in praise of God, and when they do particular rituals, an Aaronic blessing. So you can see "here lies" again. So he was a Cohen, a priest. And so that's what that symbolizes. In the top right, you'll see kind of an altar box that stuff is put in. At least that's how I read that particular one. And this is one who's usually a good almsgiver, very charitable, give a lot. You'll see candles, sticks, menorah, not the 9-candle one. I don't have one of those here. You got a 7 and 5. But typically these are associated more with women's graves, ones who lived a life of devotion. My understanding is, on Fridays before the going down of the sun, from which the Sabbath would, go and commence, that, they would light candles. And so it got associated with them. The other one you see is a bunch of rocks. This is a Jewish tradition to mark rocks, on graves. I've heard various explanations as to why. For some it was, kind of way of protecting against, certain evil forces. For others, it was a view of, hey, the soul of the person is there near the grave for a little while, so a rock kind of helps it stay in place. I think this last explanation is the most probable for why people do it, and it's a way of saying, hey, I was here. I'm commemorating that I was here. And when you look at like a flower that you put by a grave that many of us do, it withers, it dies, it goes away. But when you have these collections of rocks and people stacking them there, putting them there, they're all saying, I remember you, I valued you, I came, I was here. So
Marty,
yep.
in some military cemeteries, you'll find coins on top of the gravestones, like a nickel, dime, quarters, and they mean different things, and I do not know what they mean, but I have read about that, and the coins being put on top.
Didn't know that one. That's cool.
Yeah,
man.
I do not know what's what, but it can mean things like I served with this individual. Perhaps I was with them when they died, and I do not know what else, but those are a couple that I have heard of.
Marty, Brother Hill said it looked like some of the rocks are holding down messages.
It does. I saw the same thing. I was curious on that. I just knew about the rocks. I didn't know if they wrote something on them, a prayer or a thank you, or who knows, a scripture. All right. Obviously, the U.S. military has many different religious markers, of which a person who dies in the armed forces can, put on their grave. You have a Baha'i symbol, an Episcopal cross there, right? If you're Muslim, Islam, and then this is even a Wicca symbol, right, on the far right. So there's many different ones you can go and put on your grave today. Military has, of course, other markings. This is something I learned while I was researching on this. The United States didn't really have a formal gravestone marker that it used for a soldier until the United States Civil War. And after that, they created 2 different kinds of gravestones. Not surprisingly, the Union one was first, in which you will see it's got a smooth curved top, and then it comes down, and then you have the shield emblem in the center. And this is, where they would put the name and the rank of the person, the company that they served in, the regiment, so on. and sometimes, of course, the Spanish-American War. But they would then go, put their information there showing that, they served in the armed forces. And it was a standardized look. And of course, people marked their military, pursuits prior, but in terms of having it, uniquely marked in a standardized fashion, it didn't really happen, until then. You can see Confederate soldiers, however, on the left. What's different about them? What do you see?
Marty, since I have ancestors with this headstone, of course, it has more of a pointed, like a rooftop.
Yeah.
And also in the middle is a different symbol. It's hard to tell between the lighting on the left one, but has the wreath inside that. I don't know if you want to call it a cross or whatever. And also it doesn't have a circle around it like the Union one does. Those are
Correct.
some of the distinct differences between Union and Confederate.
Correct. That's the Southern Cross of Honor there in the top center in that point. So if you just look at the shape of the gravestone, I'm just saying you can tell very quickly which side of the American Civil War your ancestor was on.
I had one
did
that
not
fought
know
on both
that.
sides. So,
Marty,
Mhm.
you said there was not a standardized marker until the Civil War. I just have a hazy memory of some Revolutionary War graves where you had sort of an obelisk with a fairly large ball on top.
yeah, that
Where was that something done later? After the Civil War, perhaps? Or do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't happen to know what you're talking about in this case, but I mean, if what I read is wrong, that's quite possible.
no, I've got a picture of my third great grandfather's
Yeah.
Marty, and it may have been done after the Civil War, but it's kind of like an obelisk, has a ball on the top, and on the front it has his information, his general information, but on the back it says enlisted in the Revolution under Washington, served faithfully until
Oh,
its
like this?
close. No, not that big.
Not
Okay.
that big, but yeah, and they're about 4 feet tall. And if you go into a cemetery, at least in the Midwest and even North Carolina, which is where I've done the grave stomping, you can just stand at the gate of the cemetery and go, there's one, and there's one, and there's one. So I'll see if I can find one. We can send you a picture of hers and get it to you, but later.
On
Yeah,
that, on that third picture that you have up right now, if you look straight into the back, you can see kind of one standing right there.
That could be.
Yeah, they're on the
Very-
right.
Very similar.
Yeah, right here. I see what you're saying.
Yeah. That looks very similar to what I'm talking about.
Grandpa Silver.
Well, let's put a pin in that one. That may be the case, right? That's just what I read on. And at least you know how to distinguish for the Civil War where your sides are on. So
And what you said has been extremely interesting.
you'll see other military ones. If you see often like a flag draped, they died usually in the battle, right? Anytime you usually see something that's drooping in a gravestone, it's usually about like sadness and going. You see Moses Wade's one of my ancestors here. You'll often see on a grave, even if it isn't one of the formalized markers that we saw on the last slide, but just their rank, what conflict they were involved in. There's great resources online if you're not aware on how to decipher the abbreviations used in military code, you might say, or speak on a gravestone. So if you're not sure, please just check resources online.
Marty, when I pass away, I will have a military gravestone.
All right.
I'm entitled to a military burial in a military cemetery and with a headstone from the military.
Do you want that, Don?
Yes.
Okay. All right. It's like, don't go too far from me. I want to be there.
He earned it,
Well,
believe me.
Yeah,
there
that
is a
can.
cemetery somewhere around Dallas is the military the cemetery where if I die here, where I would be buried. So,
Okay, as long as it's in the area, I approve.
okay. Now,
So-
you can do like my sister. She's gonna donate her body to medical school. And then when they're through with it, they're gonna cremate it. And I don't know what happens to it after that, so. But
Got it.
yeah,
different symbols of grief you'll see. So I showed the draped flag, right? But there's other things that hang down to show sadness. Usually it's a weeping willow. Imagine that, you know, our traditions are so poetic here. Yeah, so you can see all this, you know, sadness at the passing of someone. You'll see sometimes a tree that's cut short or a column that is. One thing I thought was interesting is that usually a broken column or tree is meant to mean like an early death. And yet when I see in this example in the top right is that people haven't even died yet. You know, like it just has their birthday. So I thought, that's strange. Are they planning on dying soon or that, or again, the ambiguity of symbols, right? But I was told, you know, if it means this sort of thing, it has that. And I'm like, hey, they're not dead. That's funny.
Maybe they had a sale on the plots or something.
Yeah. Don't have a death wish, guys. All right, lambs. This one was very consistent. It's usually youth who's passed away, a young lamb. You know, I initially, when I first glanced at it, I was like, oh, it's Lamb, the Christ, you know, the Lamb of God. Well, no, not often from my experience when I studied. It was really just someone teenager, a young baby, a young child, a lamb. So Arwine Katie, this is from our local Arwine Cemetery off Pipeline. Right? It's even the first burial there in the Arwine Cemetery. So lots of lambs that you'll see if you pay attention. You'll see different flowers and doves, symbols of purity and chastity, hope that you know, come about in graves. Same thing with birds, you know, being at peace, you know, symbols of God. To think of what brought, you know, the sign of the flood was over, right? Was, you know, a bird. So this is what the sand graves. So I have to do a time check. Unfortunately, I'm at 7:58, and I think I'm 2/3 through. I still got a lot more to show. Should I pause this? Should I keep going? What should I do?
Go
I'm
ahead
more
and keep
long-winded than
going.
I expected.
Sure, go ahead and keep going. If anybody needs to leave, we are recording it and we'll post it.
Okay. So if you look, there's a lot of Grand Master Mason symbols here, Mason symbols. I imagine many of us have friends or family or someone who has been involved with the Masons, you know, before in the past. There's lots of symbols here to study and appreciate. The most common one is what that people see.
Square and compass.
That's right. It's common symbols. What do they mean? What is the compass for?
To live a straight life.
Well, that's more the straight edge, right?
Hmm.
So the compass is usually the bounds in which you live your life. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
You turn the compass around to draw a circle.
That's right.
Right. You'll notice as Latter-day Saints, we use this symbol too, right? That they means something very similar, except notice the direction of the compass used by a Mason and the direction of the compass used by a Latter-day Saint. What's the difference? Where is it pointed? So Latter-day Saint one's pointed up, right? Grand Mason's one is pointed down. So we're saying that we will live our lives in the bounds God has set, not the ones we set for ourselves. I think that's a fascinating distinction in the use of the symbol. Of course, we also use the square to you know, live upright, honest lives.
The
Yep.
just the square and compass designates usually a 32nd degree Mason. And if you see a 33 in the middle, then that's a 33rd degree Mason, and that's a little higher knowledge, a little more ritualistic work that they did during their life. So
Love it. You'll see other ones too. What is the eye that's bright? And a few of them.
yeah, there's an eye and a
What's that mean?
like
You
an
see-
it's
see it
an
on your-
all-seeing, it's an all-seeing eye.
That's right. You'll see it on
it's
your
on
dollar
the
bill,
American money. Yeah.
right? All seeing eye of God. omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. What's this acronym at the top? Yeah, threw me off a little bit. I don't think I remember all of it, but it's like in the name of the great architect of the universe, I believe.
That sounds right.
Yeah. Now, of course, we got the temple, it's columns, which I expect are quite similar to the Jerusalem temple comment made earlier on Jewish graves. Then G, intimate, can mean a few different things. I've heard God is the most common, but I've also heard geometry, the sense of, of course, you're using compasses, squares, geometry, you're in that same mantra there. Of course, there's symbols of stars, sunlight. What's the light that is supposed to guide the Mason as they go and live their life like a North Star. You'll see the gavel in the center, so that one on the left in the center towards the bottom. That gavel can mean a couple things. One is the authority of the Mason, but it can also mean like you use a gavel or a mallet to take off the rough like edges of a rock. And so it's the idea of kind of like polishing off the difficult parts of yourself and your character.
A gavel is also used to close a meeting. And so that may be the close of life here upon this earth.
Like it. So see those. Then there's the handshake. This you got to be very careful on. I spoke about ambiguity earlier. So Masons do have handshakes. And if you look at the second picture, that is most absolutely a Masonic, arch leading, and you can see the compass and the square, in the bottom right-hand corner of it. And of course, there is a Masonic handshake, above that. But the other ones don't necessarily mean Masonic things. So you've got to be careful when you see handshakes. The Masons had lots of different handshakes, for, if you're an apprentice, a master, if you're a fellow, there's just different handshakes that they had. So those, change over time. But when you see handshakes, on graves, they can be very different. If you look in that one on the far right, you'll often have like a female like hand that then is clasping a male's hand. And you can tell somewhat by the cuffing of the hand on each side. And that can be more of, a marriage union and the desire to be together. Other times it's a farewell, like shaking a hand, I'm out of here. I'm moving on to the other side. So you can't just conclude from a handshake that it means a particular thing. You need other parts of context in there to guide you. So if you see someone's a wife of someone, or it's a marriage, or burial of them together, think more along those marital lines, but try to study other things about those hands to gather that. If you see certain placements of the hand in certain joints of the hand and so on, then you're going to have a better, clear understanding of being Masonic, or if it's next to the Masonic symbols. Okay, other fraternal ones. We showed my Joseph Giddens grave before. There's that FLT for the Odd Fellows. So for the friendship, light, love, and truth that they go in pursuit of. The Odd Fellow views death as inevitable, right? We're all going to die. So the question becomes, how should I live while I do? And so they use those three, guideposts of friendship, love, and truth to guide them on how they should live their life. Is this a demonic symbol in the middle on the bottom? Is it a reproduction of a Nauvoo window? What is it? Does anyone know?
Is that Eastern Star?
That is correct.
Yes.
$500 to Jim Hauser. He nailed it.
Oh,
Yeah.
Let's see. It also says fatal around it. What does that mean? Does it mean that it's deadly? Fatal. No, it's usually fair as thousands, altogether lovely. It's a comment from the Book of Solomon, right? And it's usually in reference to the heroines of the Bible, particularly emblematic figures that they strive to be like and to follow their virtues.
The 5 points were 5 different matrons that
That is correct.
were in the Bible. Ada, Ruth, Esther, Electra,
That is one of them.
and what's the other one?
Look at this guy. He's got it.
I don't know. There's one more.
His parents were his mom was Eastern Star and his dad was a Mason, so
There you go. Shame on you for not loving the last one then.
Okay, forget it.
All right, this next one, does anyone recognize these?
No, I don't want to.
Woodman of the world.
There's Martha.
That or Modern Woodmen of America, one of the two. The one on the far right's a total cheat, is not either. It's a Tree of Life from a Jewish one. I just want to see if anyone catch the difference. But the first two are definitely, woodmen symbols. I first encountered these doing the Bedford Cemetery, and I thought, what the heck is that crazy, like live, almost looking tree gravestone? And I thought the person was this great like woodcutter or something like that. But what do woodmen of the world actually do? Do you guys know? Are they lumberjacks? No, they have nothing to do with cutting wood at all. So you see it and you think that, there's some like, I don't know, outdoorsmen or something like that. Nope, not at all. So they were involved with financial institutions mostly. So trying to protect their brothers and their community by helping them get insurance, helping them to have savings, estate planning, retirement. That is what these guys were involved with. So that being whether the modern woodmen of America or the woodmen of the world.
I think there's still an insurance company, and I don't know if you have to be a member to partake of that or not.
My kids were given each one of them. We got a insurance policy out on them from Modern Woodmen.
All right.
At the beginning of their lives, and two of them still have the policy going. Oh, all three. Okay.
It lives on.
Yeah, it lives on.
Yeah.
So yeah, that surprised me. I did not think that they would be involved in financial institutions. So just felt so rugged and outdoorsy. All right. Other ones you can get are occupations. Sometimes there's symbols that suggest that, like you look at this one on the left, right there, there's a boat, and it says, hey, it's in memory of Captain Giles Latham, a mariner who died, right? So that symbol can clue you in on, their occupation. The one on the right doesn't really show a symbol of their occupation, but just notes it in the writing. So I'm calling out again that you can find occupation there, right? Here rests, the body of Mr. Edmund Anger, merchant, right? He's a merchant. Beautiful tombstone here. You can start seeing these cool, and they look so awesome in New England. You see them all over the place. These sunken skulls with wings. The dead is departed. They're no longer there. Other occupational ones. What's the one on the left? Is that just a cool serpent? Yep, medical. Right. So they are a beloved physician. Asa was here. Very fitting for his name too, with Asa meaning healer. Right. It's just great. He lived up to his name. Then he got here on the right, another person who's a mariner, Travis Smith, a lieutenant. Coats of arms can also be seen on these. So the symbols are the same as the coat of arms itself. And so if you look up the coat of arms meaning, you can see, hey, one, that it belongs, to that group, but also what the coat of arms itself means. You'll see these more in New England, of course, less in the ones that would pass away today, right? These are more your 18th century, early 19th century graves. Significant life events you'll sometimes see too. On the bottom left one, this is the grave of John Grizzly Adams, and there he is with a grizzly bear. I just love it. On the right, we have someone who came aboard the Mayflower, right? And so there's the Mayflower on top of the grave. I thought that was pretty neat. You'll also see just general symbols and other things, like on this one, while it has that military grave, like look, it notes just the lot number on the grave. I thought that was interesting. So I guess if you have a map and you're just trying to find the grave, you can follow that to help yourself get there. For a minute, I was like, wait, what? 4598, does that matter or something like that? Nope, it's lot number. Other ones, time flies, right? Like this meeting today, it really flew, it got past me. So you can see how someone's life's passed away. What is around that hourglass though? Is it just a circle? What is it? It isn't. It's a snake. See, a snake that's eating its own tail. Which is usually a symbol of eternity. Which is kind of fascinating against time, to create it circular and also say it flies. It's kind of fascinating paradox there. You'll see the orb I was trying to show earlier. So usually gone to the celestial sphere. This next one on the right's interesting. It's a torch, but what direction is it pointed? Upside down, right? So it's like, the death, the extinguishment of the life. But if it's still flaming, it's still going on, right? More hourglasses we have here. It was their time, right? Their hour came. This one I thought was really cool. I liked it. For a second, I thought they were like fighting over the person's life or something. But I was like, no, that's not it. You can tell that you get death on the right side, right? With an extinguisher, for putting out a candle, right? But then on the left, it's not really as much an angel as it is Father Time. Look at Father Time. What is he holding? He's holding that hourglass too, right? So they're both saying, hey, it's this guy's time. Partners in crime here. This one was more puzzling to me. I didn't know what to make of some of it. So this is where you get to some difficult symbols. So, you often have trumpets, which will be, symbolic of a particular event, like say the resurrection, right? The trumps will sound. But you have other things that are more difficult, Okay, yes, there's that crown in the center. You see heavenly clouds and hands coming through that. Usually that's the presence of divinity, right? But what's from above, reaching here. But then there's these cord, right? It's being held from one hand to the other and then kind of goes to that center piece. What is this? What is the significance here? You can imagine some things, but it gets a little bit difficult to piece together. So I consider this one a bit of a conundrum. Yeah, if you got your own opinions on it, I'm happy to hear.
Might be interesting that that even though we have a time in life, that it is guarded by our Heavenly Father, both on both ends, the birth and the death.
I like it. Following is a kind of chronological experience of you might say the thread has a beginning and an end. That's the finitude, the mortality, and then coming back in the hands of eternity. That's interesting. I like it. All right. Other ones, there's just more general communications of death, mortality. You can see here, this is where I argue there's ambiguity. People say it's a setting sun, but I say, well, how do you know it's not rising? You can look at it either way. And of course, it could mean both. But it could be the setting of one's life, they died, or it could be the coming into a new life, right, with God. So either way, there's a communication of at least a triggering event of moving on. You'll see the awesome winged skull I spoke about. You also see just winged figures that don't necessarily have a skull. Maybe the skull was seen as too grim initially. Hey, that thing of look, you're gonna die, and everyone is, so be ready. That was kind of the grave approach. And they're like, hey, maybe we should soften that a little bit. Let's make it more like human-like looking. That their character, their personality is moving on. Well, the skull, that's what's staying down here in the grave, right? So let's focus on the other part of the person. So that kind of shifted over time. See that in each of these. Sometimes they're crowned. So a crown of glory, I presume they lived a good life. So the idea is as they move on, that they're going to a good place, or a halo of light, like swan, that one on the right. I have no idea on that one on the bottom right. I just thought it looked cool. You can see that their likeness started getting carved in a little bit too. They weren't just these generic human faces, but ones that somewhat seem to communicate the person. So this is your ancestor. It can be really cool to study and get in and see some of their clothing, like on the one on the right side, or just their face here. He's very puzzled and grumpy, right? I thought this one was fun. Very, very proud, noble here on the left profile. So you'll see funerary urns. So we over time we've become more accustomed to cremation, but it was a much more common Roman Greek practice. And then even though we shifted to doing more formal burials, we still then marked the grave with a funerary urn or one that suggested ashes there, and even though there was no ashes, just to say, hey, this is where they died, using it as a symbol. So that's actually David Whitmer's grave, Latter-day Saint, early leader. And then to close,
Marty,
yep. Go ahead.
on cremation, I know that their cemeteries now not only have mausoleums, but they also have a portion of the mausoleum building, specifically niches to put ashes, cremation ashes in them. And
Yep.
so I know that when Don was saying he wasn't sure what was going to happen to his, was it your sister?
Yes.
You know, there's a lot of different things after cremation that you can do, whether it's actually in a cemetery like this or a building that is specific to cremation urns.
Correct. I've seen those. My Pulido grandparents, they were both cremated, and they're not in a building. Like you said, they just have a much smaller plot where they're buried with their ashes, and we stuck the urn down there. You know, when they passed. But I've seen, as you're saying too, more specific, you know, areas which they're sat either on shelves or in boxes in the building structure. All right, this is the last one because it's Halloween. Sometimes you'll see these witch stones, so those can be fun, where they either more specifically call them out as a witch or have a symbol of a witch. You know, some are fun where it calls them out that they got burned or pressed together for their life. You know, so if you're Sarah Jessica Parker, who is related to some of the Salem witches of old, you might get a kick out of that. So that is it. So this is my closing just shot of, hey, that they live on, the dead, you know, it's a lot of fun to study these graves and learn what we can from them, to research them better. And I hope you've seen the wealth of iconography that can apply on gravestones, and also the wealth of information that you can gain from them to connect with and respect your ancestors. Any final questions, comments?
Marty, I had already told Shirley and John this. I'm a reporter for the stake website. And I am writing an article on that. And so if I can enlist your help later.
Yeah, so you're echoing there, but
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe not phone.
I think it's probably someone else. Many people are.
I am a reporter for the Hurst stake website.
Yes, I'm happy to help you with something after.
Thank you, Marty.
All right, I shall turn it back to the Johnsons unless there's questions from the group. Maybe you studied a gravestone from an ancestor and you're like, what the heck does that mean? Or this has stumped me. Happy to hear that and put it in the group.
Is anybody still curious about what the coins mean on a military headstone?
Yes.
Okay, the coins on a headstone date back to when to Greek times, when they had to have money for the to cross the river Styx. Remember your that old mythological stuff. But the on a military headstone now, a penny means that you visited. A nickel means that you and the deceased veteran trained at boot camp together. A dime means that you and the deceased veteran served together in some capacity. A quarter is very significant because it means you and the veteran, you were with the veteran when he died.
Wow.
How did you get that? I got it off the internet. It's in a veterans webpage. So there you go.
The all-knowing Google.
Thanks, Brother Perkins.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Any other comments, questions, or are you all ready to leave because I kept you so long? All right, I'll turn the time back.
Thanks, Marty.
Marty, that was probably one of the best and funnest and what, that was really good. Thank you.